Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve. It is 8.5 million acres of nearly pristine Arctic habitat. It's remote and encompasses the majority of the Brooks Range in northern Alaska. The peaks here can rise to a little over 7,000 feet in elevation, and almost all the park's territory is mountainous. Most of the 10 inches of precipitation that falls here yearly is bound in snow, which melts each spring. This flood of water signals the salmon to migrate upstream to spawn their next generation. Brown bears are then drawn to the willow and alder bushes that grow alongside the waterways to fish for those salmon. Animals you might see include black bears, muskoxen, moose, Dall sheep, wolves, wolverines, coyotes, and lynxes. River otters and beavers swim the creeks, and eagles, hawks, and owls patrol the tundra for pikas, ground squirrels, and lemmings. In the Brooks Range Valley, over 500,000 caribou migrate in pursuit of the most nutritious grazing grounds. Reportedly, only 132 brown bears call the park home, which is a density of 1 bear for every 100 square miles. That means your odds are not great to see one, but in the event you do, the disposition of the bear may be your greatest concern. Robert Bell was born in Ithaca, New York, and received his law degree from the University of Pennsylvania. He was part of a team of lawyers at Kay, Scholar, Fearman, Hayes, and Handler that had recently won the largest award granted by a federal jury to that point, of $100 million. He was a brilliant man, but was known for being a caring and genuine person, and described as not your typical lawyer type of person. In the months leading up to August 1996, 42-year-old Bell had been planning a backcountry boating and hiking trip with 2 of his friends in the gates of the Arctic National Park. They'd charted their route to travel the river system that followed the Noatak River, which flows north and west into the Chukchi Sea. Bell and his friends would float for part of the day, then beach their boat at planned waypoints. This pause in their float would allow them to hike up trails and take in scenery that most people will never get to set their eyes on. They were aiming to start their big adventure on August 19, 1996. Bell's group had brought backpacks and the typical camping gear to prepare food and set up tents, as most people would do. They'd even had the forethought to attach bear bells to their backpacks to let the bears know they were around. Additionally, they planned to talk and make noise as they hiked, just to make sure the bears got the message. They didn't take any firearms, though. Whether it was a matter of the added weight they would have to carry, or simply the lack of expectation of needing one, either way, they chose not to bring them along. The adventure began with energy and excitement, and by Tuesday, August 26th, they had arrived near the confluence of the Noatak and Kugrak rivers. The location was on their waypoints list, so they beached their boat and gathered their hiking gear to do some exploration. One of the hikers, whom we'll call Sam, decided to stay with the boat and let Bell and their other companion, whom we'll call Mike, go on the hike without him. Bell and Mike spent the better part of the day hiking up the Kugrak River, and after turning around, were on their way back toward their boat. While passing through a patch of 7-foot-tall willows, the men caught sight of a brown bear sow with her cub. They had seen her while still a few hundred yards from her, and had time to discuss navigating around the bears at a safe distance. They planned to make noise as they circled her, so that she would not be alarmed by their presence, and either run away or allow them to pass her. Now, to understand how the men's scents would travel in this environment, we must first discuss the weather. That day there were strong gusts of wind blowing consistently from the north to the south most of the afternoon. Temperatures hovered at just above 40 degrees for the same time frame. There was no precipitation reported in the area, which means that scents would be carried further and in higher concentrations on the breeze. Given the mountainous terrain, scents tend to travel in the same direction as the wind and follow contours like the airflow. If the overall flow of air is along a river drainage, then the scent of the men would tend to travel that same route. A consistent breeze may carry a human scent right past a bear's nose, but even a slight shift could bring the scent directly to the bear. The consistent wind created a noisy rustle that would keep any sound the men could generate from reaching the bear's sense of hearing. Mike decided he would go first and slowly proceeded around the sow and her cub while talking and making noise. It was tense going, and Belle watched from an elevated point to see how the sow reacted as Mike passed by. As Belle watched, he could see the sow lifting her head and sampling the air, but she didn't have an alarmed or aggressive reaction to Mike's presence. This emboldened Belle that his hike around her would go as well as Mike's did. Once he saw Mike wave at him from the far side of the bears, Belle planned to travel the same route and do the same things that Mike did. If it worked for him, it should work fine for Belle too. The only problem with that kind of thinking is that it relies on the predictability of bears. Mike looked on as Belle initiated his turn to pass the bears. He was about halfway through the route and making noise when Mike saw the sow's head lift. She suddenly became very focused on the spot where Belle was making noise. In a split second, the sow became a brown streak that was headed straight for his friend. Mike could hear the willows popping and tossing as the bear blew through them. He next heard Belle yell for help, followed by grunts and growls from the sow. In a matter of seconds, Mike could hear nothing from Belle's location. Not a moan or a shout. Nothing. Mike had no doubts about what had happened to his friend. After his shouts went unanswered, he quickly made his way back to the boat and informed Sam about Belle's fate. The two friends decided to return to the attack site and see if they could recover Belle's body. Once they located his corpse, they knew his death was quick. He didn't struggle very long with the wounds he suffered. They carried Belle's corpse back to the location of their boat to ensure it wasn't consumed by the bears. Now in one of the most remote areas in the world, without a means to reach anyone, the men decided to do the only thing they could do. They worked out a plan to try to signal passing aircraft to summon help. By Saturday, August 31st, the men were flown out alongside Belle's body. Upon examination, Belle was noted to have died instantly from the damage the sow had done to his body. This means that most likely he'd died from a strike or bite to his head or neck, or instantaneous death would not have been likely. Belle's wife, Jody, also an attorney, flew up to Alaska to bring his body home for burial. Following the attack, officials closed off the area to aid in their investigation. They wanted to take a good look at the bear population before allowing people back in the area. After reviewing the circumstances of Belle's fatal bear attack, they decided to take no action against the bear. They deemed the sow's behavior normal for a brown bear protecting her young. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. What triggered the sow to attack Belle, but not Mike? Do you think the noise the men made aggravated the sow? Why on earth didn't these guys pack firearms? Would you have tried to sneak around a sow brown bear and her cub? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Yellowstone National Park. No, we aren't going to the broad expanses of the Lamar Valley or some backcountry trail too close to a bison carcass. The attack we will be discussing happened at one of the most visited locations in the entire park, Old Faithful Geyser. Yes, the crowds of people that visit the geyser in the peak month of July approach 1 million in number. That comes out to about 30,000 people daily and about 1,000 people each hour. The elevation here is a little over 7,300 feet high, and the rolling granite hills are sparsely covered with pine, fir, and spruce trees. Elk, moose, deer, bison, and antelope are visible from nearly any road in the park, but sometimes cause traffic jams here. The raised boardwalks meander a safe distance away from deceptively tranquil pools of boiling mineralized water. Black bears, cougars, coyotes, and wolves roam this area, but the danger they pose pales in comparison to those grizzly bears present. On Saturday, June 24th, 1972, 25-year-old Harry Walker was hitchhiking around the country in a reevaluation of his life. He was traveling with his friend, 29-year-old Philip Bradbury from Oxford, Alabama, who went by the nickname Crow. Harry hailed from Anniston, Alabama, and was a farmer. The men had left 19 days prior and wound up in Yellowstone during its centennial celebration. Upon entering the park, the men were allowed admittance for free because they were on foot and not in a vehicle. The rangers didn't do this for everyone, but allowed Harry and Philip in as a favor. While making their way through the various gates and offices, the men had somehow managed to miss all the literature provided regarding the danger of bears in the park. For the past few decades, there had been a debate brewing among biologists and other scientists about just how the park should be run. In 1943, Olaus Murray had called on authorities to close down dumps that park employees used to dispose of their trash. Bears were known to gather around the dump sites, and at one point 7 grizzlies had been observed at a single dump. Given the total population was below 100 bears at one point, that is a significant percentage of the bear population that were relying on dumps for food. For the 8 decades prior, bears had been allowed to scavenge food from Yellowstone dumps, but conscientious scientists noted that they didn't need them, and it was unnatural. Given this permission and encouragement, bears that otherwise would avoid human contact were trained to tolerate and even seek it out for sustenance. Since the bears were hanging out along the roads, begging for food, many visitors safely ventured into the backcountry, which was nearly void of bears in comparison. By the late 60s, the discussion had reached fever pitch, and 2 camps had formed among the scientists. One camp believed in closing the dumps at once and forcing the bears to go back to natural food sources. The other camp was led by 2 biologists, the Craighead brothers. The Craigheads noticed that closing the dumps too quickly would force human-dependent bears to invade campgrounds in search of food. They proposed that road-killed carcasses of deer, elk, and bison be helicoptered into the backcountry to lure the bears away from the dumps. The dumps could then be closed slowly so that lingering bears would follow their noses to feed on carcasses and away from campgrounds. The Craighead brothers summarized their proposal in a 113-page report and delivered it to Yellowstone Superintendent John McLaughlin in 1967. In the same year, a spat of grizzly bear maulings and human fatalities occurred in Glacier National Park and became known as the Night of the Grizzlies. 2 women were killed by bears habituated to eating from dumps near ranger stations. The potential of having a similar occurrence in Yellowstone prompted McLaughlin to order an immediate and sudden closure of all dumps in the park. Visitors to the park were not provided bear-proof dumpsters at this time, and weren't particularly afraid of having bears come into their camps. After all, only a few years prior they were allowed to hand-feed bears along the roadsides. Their perception of bears was that they were harmless and wouldn't hurt you, even if they did eat all of your food. Grizzlies being grizzlies, the closure of the dumps caused an enormous uptick in bear attacks and hostility. The rangers were charged with protecting the public, so the problem bears were shot, reducing an already low population to near extinction. In 1970, 57 grizzlies were killed by people, and only 5 years later, just 136 grizzlies remained. This brings us back to Harry and Philip's visit to the park. The men had decided to camp at Old Faithful Geyser at an unauthorized campsite. Rangers knew that many visitors were illegally camping but overlooked it, neglecting to enforce the laws due to the experience people were having. They pitched their camp only a few hundred feet from the boardwalk, behind a screen of lodgepole pines. They could easily walk to the creek for water from there, and only had to worry about the rangers chasing them out. Just behind their campsite, a thick growth of smaller trees screened anything hiding within it from view. Since the park authorities failed to notify the public of the dumping ground closures, the men were unaware of the danger they were in. What Harry and Philip didn't know was that a sow that lived in the area had been known as a problem bear. The ranges had coordinated her relocation previously, but she'd always found her way back. She was a regular at the dump behind the Rabbit Creek Ranger Station, which was closed, and now she was looking for a new food source. The Craighead brothers had conducted a 10-year study on the grizzlies in Yellowstone Park, in which this sow was an unwilling participant. They had pioneered the use of radio collars for collecting data on bears and their travel patterns. She was caught and collared by the brothers and was labeled as Bear 1792. By the end of the Craighead study, all data and observations regarding the location and travel patterns of bears had ended at the same time the dump sites were closed. At the time of her capture and collaring, Bear 1792 was noted to be an older female with worn-out and broken teeth. When she was relocated, she was moved to an area only 18 miles away and easily found her way back. Now Harry and Philip were enjoying their time in the park, and Philip had taken LSD that evening. They spent a good portion of the night wandering the geyser basin, chatting with people, and soaking in all that the park offered. By around 1 a.m., they were headed back to their clandestine campsite, using their flashlights to illuminate their way. The men were what rangers would call dirty campers. They left their food storage on the ground and didn't remove their food waste from their campsite. As they approached their tents, Harry paused and asked Philip if he'd heard something. The men craned their necks and heard chewing sounds coming from just a few yards away and near their tents. Harry lifted the beam from his flashlight in the direction of the noise, and it was immediately filled with the open jaws of a charging grizzly bear. The sow was upon the men before they could do anything but yell. Harry was knocked down with a swat of the bear's paws, and Philip turned to run. Within the first few steps of his retreat, Philip was sent tumbling down the hillside. He rolled and tumbled several yards, giving him separation from the bear's anger. The sow immediately turned back toward Harry and pounced on him in a frenzied attack. Philip could hear the bear growling and his friend howling in pain as he ran a short distance before turning around. He hadn't seen Harry, but was sure the bear had left. They had merely surprised her after all, and he was hopeful that she'd fled after sending the men running. Philip turned his head toward their camp and yelled, "Harry, did the bear leave yet?" His question was met with Harry's plea, "Help me, Crow." Harry's cries for his friend brought the sow back to finish what she'd started. Philip turned and stumbled toward the Old Faithful Inn about a quarter-mile away. Philip followed the lights on the building to its front doors and stumbled inside, breathing heavily and exhausted by about 1:10 a.m. He stammered that his friend had been attacked by a bear and needed help. The rangers headed out to the campsite, but were uneasy about entering the timber in the dark of night. Calling out for Harry and hearing no reply, they returned, deciding to wait until morning. By sunrise, a handful of rangers had returned to the men's campsite and quickly found Harry's remains. The grizzly had partially consumed his body, so they gathered his corpse to deliver to the coroner. They next set out snares and used road-killed carcasses as bait. The sow returned to the place where she left Harry's corpse and was snared, allowing rangers to capture her. While restrained by the snare, she was shot and killed. The carcass of the 400-pound sow was taken to Montana State for analysis. The forensics team there found human hair on the sow's claws. Her stomach contained tinfoil and other camp debris that she'd consumed at the men's campsite. Following Harry's death, his family filed a lawsuit alleging negligence on the part of park management. They won their case in circuit court, but the Ninth Circuit overturned the circuit court's decision. The Supreme Court refused to take up the case, and Harry's family lost their farm, seeking justice. Their efforts did lead to the park refining policies on how bears were managed. Although the dump site supported the bears, it caused a very negative change in their behavior. For several years after their closure, bears were observed digging in dump sites that had long since been covered over. The grizzlies clearly remembered their former source of food and would regularly visit in hopes of finding more, even decades later. Due to mismanagement, grizzly bear populations bottomed out in 1990 at only 99 bears. It has taken almost 30 years for populations to reach their current levels of an estimated 750 bears. A book by the name of Engineering Eden, written by Jordan Fisher Smith, discusses this attack and its ramifications on modern environmental policy. I've linked to it in the pinned comment below, so check it out. I've also provided a link to the information revealed in the lawsuit filed by Harry's family. It paints a clear picture of the park's negligence. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Were park authorities negligent in their actions, or do park visitors assume the risk while in the park? Should people be involved in natural processes, or leave them alone? Should grizzly bear populations be managed through hunting or relocation? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Sioux River and its delta in southeast Alaska. This area is nearly sea level and consists of sand and gravel bars split by fingers of the Sioux River as it makes its way into the Gulf of Alaska. As it braids into different streams, it creates several avenues for fishermen to pitch lures and tempt hungry salmon making their way up the waterway. As the subjects of our episode found out, it isn't only fishermen who stalk the brush and swales. In the months before August 1986, Bob and Marietta Herron were organizing a salmon fishing trip along the Sioux River in Alaska. They pitched the idea to their friend Bill Myers, and he decided to tag along. By August, their plans for a salmon fishing trip into the Alaska wilds were transforming into reality. As the fishing trip approached, Bob had inquired of the outfitter, Brent, if they should bring firearms with them. Brent informed them that firearms are no good unless you know how to use them, so Bob and Marietta brought Bill along with them to the shooting range for practice. Bob and Marietta had purchased twin .357 Magnums, manufactured by Colt, and Bill had opted for the .357 Magnum by Smith & Wesson. All three pistols were revolvers and very powerful in form and function. Brent, the outfitter, agreed to set up all the necessary equipment, transportation, and rigging for the fishing expedition. Dates were set and arrangements were made to bring the three Los Angelinos to the land of the midnight sun. When the departure date arrived, they knew they would have no concerns about their trip. The food, shelter, and fishing gear were up there waiting for them. After a series of flights and relaying flights, they eventually stepped from a small aircraft onto the sandbars along the Sioux River Delta, and the promise of pure salmon fishing bliss it offered. Bob and Marietta glanced around the delta, took in the cool, clean air, and stared at the forested rise just above their camp. The Gulf of Alaska lapped upon the shore as the camp assistant Brenda erected the wall tents. The tents were a canvas fabric placed over a plywood floor and walls. There were 4 tents up, and Bob and Marietta and Bill chose theirs and deposited their belongings inside. Soon a young man, probably in his mid-20s, walked up and introduced himself. He announced to the group that he would be their guide for the fishing trip and introduced himself as Randy. By his side was his wife and the camp cook, Betty. Back in the big city, the three friends relied on professionals for everything. If your electrical system had some problems, you called an electrician. If there were potholes in the road, the city maintenance department would come out and fill it. At the fishing camp, they quickly learned that if there was something that needed to be done, they needed to do it. They gathered the wood for a campfire and rolled logs near it to sit on. Soon another couple emerged from one of the wall tents. They introduced themselves as Paul and Laco Whitestone. Paul was a mellow guy, and Laco was an energetic balance to her partner. He had brought along a single-action .44 Magnum and a .38 caliber pistol, just for reassurance. Not wanting to waste time, each person grabbed a pole and headed toward the winding series of fingers the river splits into just behind their camp. The fishing was exciting and productive. The group pulled in 6 big and beautiful silver salmon by late afternoon. Randy gathered the fish and cleaned them. He placed each of the fish into a single plastic bag and used rocks to submerge it in the creek, Bob's and his tent mate's wall tent. After some quality time around the campfire, with their bellies full, the fishing party all headed for their bunks and some sleep. They planned for an early and long day fishing, so rest would be important for them. At about 4 a.m., the entire camp was awakened by an increasingly shrill scream of "Bear! Bear! Bear!" from the camp cook, Betty. Everyone quickly stumbled from their tents, flashlights searching the darkness. Bob asked Betty what had happened, and she explained that she had heard a crash outside of her tent. When she shined her flashlight, she watched as a gigantic brown bear dashed into the bushes on the edge of the camp. The campers began to look around where the bear had been seen, and quickly noted that their cooler had been crushed, the barbecue grill was smashed, and the rubber dinghy had been ripped up. The 6 salmon that Randy had submerged behind Bob's tent were missing, bag and all. They were far too excited to consider going back to bed, so they waited until the sun came up around 5 a.m. and went back to fishing. As soon as the sun rose, a sense of safety and optimism filled the fishing party. They cast their lures in the river and reeled in several glimmering salmon, but the bear continually crossed their minds. Randy could see the concern on their brows and reassured them that they had nothing to worry about. Toward the middle of the afternoon, the outfitter Brent flew in with some additional supplies. The fishing party gathered around his plane in excitement and relayed their account of the brown bear visit. After listening to the damage it had done to the camp, Brent looked at the group and said, "You may have to do away with that bear." The campers all stared at him, half expecting him to provide further information or instruction. When they realized that was his complete statement, they understood he expected them to handle the bear themselves. The tone of Brent's discussion with the group gave them an uneasy feeling. They tried to fish, but eventually ended up milling around camp and waiting for dinner. Marietta was worried, and at the campfire suggested the campers organize a bear watch. Randy was off-put by this suggestion, and played down her fears. After realizing he couldn't talk her out of it, he tacitly agreed. Just as the twilight was setting in, at around 10:30 p.m., the bear was spotted about 200 yards from camp. The campers began to yell and picked up pots and pans to cling together. The bear was driven off by all the noise, but the campers were all uneasy at the fact that it had already returned to the area around their camp. After everyone went to bed, Marietta, Bill, and Randy stayed up and talked around the campfire, serving their shifts on the bear watch. Brenda also stayed up and gladly borrowed Paul's .44 mag to reassure herself. Randy had a .30-06 hunting rifle and leaned it up against a nearby log. He had a difficult time hiding his frustration with the amount of fear that gripped the campers. Even though he was youthful, he was accustomed to salmon fishing alongside bears and didn't believe the bear posed any serious threat yet. As the evening went on, rain began to drizzle, making the bleak mood even more so. Around 12:30 a.m., the bear was spotlighted by the moonlight, which brought the pots and pans and screams from the campers once again. This time, he seemed to leave more reluctantly than before. Within 2 hours he had returned, and this time was only 70 yards away from the camp. Pots and pans clanging together and frustrated screams for much longer than before finally drove him off for the rest of the night. At sunup, the members of the Bear Watch retired for some rest. The group was beleaguered by the stress and worry the standoffs with the bear had brought. Later on that morning, a charter plane landed on the sandbar, and a pair of fishermen stepped off. After approaching the new arrivals, the elder of the group asked Bob what it was that he was packing on his hip. Bob relayed that it was a .357 Magnum pistol, and passed on the details of the encounter with the bear. The elder fisherman informed him that shooting a brown bear with a .357 mag was like trying to knock a bowling pin over with a marble. He stated that the only thing you could do with that small of a gun is put yourself out of your misery after the bear attack. With this info, Bob understood the only firearm that was adequate to protect the group was Randy's .30-06 rifle. Marietta had lost all interest in fishing, and by dinner time had volunteered to stay up again to watch for the bear. This time Randy's wife Betty agreed to keep her company. At about 1 a.m., a dense fog rolled into the camp, limiting visibility to just a few feet and making a bear watch impossible. Betty and Marietta decided to go to bed since staying up to watch was not going to be productive. At 2:30 a.m., Lyko woke up and didn't see anyone on bear watch. By around 4 a.m., Lyko woke everyone up in camp by banging on the garbage can lid. The campers stumbled from their tents and observed the bear only 50 yards away in the brush, just east of the camp. Under the illumination of several flashlights, the bear tossed its head back and forth, sniffing the scent of each of the campers. Bob, Bill, and another one of the campers fired 7 warning shots into the air before the bear decided to leave. The rest of the night was filled with anxiety and restlessness, despite the bear not returning. The next day, fishing was lackluster, and the group was tortured with the thought of the bear's return to their camp. Some of them wanted to leave as soon as possible, but given they had no radio in camp, they could not arrange a flight back to safety. At one point, Bob asked Randy how they would know if they needed to shoot the bear. Randy flatly replied, "You will know," and stared back for a few seconds. That night, Bill and camp assistant Brenda took responsibility for the bear watch. The northern lights added to the moonlight to show the bear appearing about 150 yards from camp. It was loping parallel to the camp as Bill clambered to his feet. He lifted his pistol and fired once into the air. The bear seemed to pick up its pace and then veered off toward a ranger camp down the beach. At just after 1 a.m., Bill climbed into his bunk and announced he was going to sleep. He indicated that Brenda was still out there, so Bob decided to keep her company to help pass the time. By 2 a.m., Bob picked up the bear's silhouette out on a sandbar about 70 yards from the camp and to the west. It was walking toward the camp, so Bob hopped to his feet and yelled at the bear as he fired shots into the air. Previously, after hearing the shots, the bear would begin to move away, but this time it picked up its pace as it headed toward the camp. By the time the bear was only 15 yards away and across a small creek, the rest of the campers had emerged. They joined in a loud and terrified chorus of screams and yells, banging and shooting. Hiding themselves behind a log, they kept the fire between them and the bear as it swung its head from side to side, sampling their scents once again. The frustration of the past few days began to well up in Bob, and he told the group that there would be no more warning shots. The bear knew good and well that they were people and not prey, yet it grew in boldness and aggression toward them. The noise and warning shots had only brought it closer, and now only 15 yards separated it from them. The comments the charter plane fisherman made about how inadequate the .357 Magnum would be for self-defense from a brown bear haunted Bob's mind. He quickly barked out orders to Marietta to put her pistol into the bear's ear and pull the trigger if it attacked him. The armed campers now agreed to shoot to kill if the bear crossed the small creek toward their camp. The bear was standing on its hind feet and swinging its head back and forth when it suddenly dropped to all fours and splashed into the creek, separating it from the campers. Bob and Bill began shooting, but Bob was hoping to hear a much larger volley. He urgently wanted to hear the roar of Randy's .30-06, but only heard him mutter, "Oh, damn." Paul and Brenda didn't fire a single shot, but seemed frozen in terror. The charging bear suddenly stopped in the middle of the creek. Randy yelled out to everyone to stop shooting, announcing that it hadn't been wounded yet. He stated he'd seen the bullets that were fired splashing into the surrounding water. Just as the bear turned away ever so slightly, Bob finished squeezing off one last shot. The bear jumped after Bob's shot, and the muzzle flash allowed him to see the bear's legs jerk in reaction to something. The bear disappeared into the darkness, leaving the campers uncertain of its condition and location. With almost half of the night remaining, the campers gathered around the campfire and continually watched for the bear to reappear. Randy was checking out his .30-06 and had removed the bullet that wouldn't fire from its action. After examining the bullet, he pointed out that the firing pin hadn't dented the primer. The rifle was too dirty to operate reliably, and clearly hadn't been cleaned or fired in a long time. As the campers warily watched, they would see the bear a few times throughout the remaining hours. It would dash from one place to another a few hundred yards away, then disappear for a while. Then in another place it would dash across a sandbar, to disappear once again. After a few tense hours, the sunrise brought the twilight of morning. Bob and Randy searched the sandbars and gravel swales for the bear, when Randy pointed out a large mound of gravel that wasn't familiar to them, a few hundred yards away. The men agreed to go investigate and cautiously made their way toward the mound. Several yards away from it, they could see a long line of bear scat, finishing at the bear's carcass. It had purged its bowels as it staggered, its final few steps before expiring. Randy rolled the bear over and quickly began to perform an informal necropsy on the bear's carcass. After examining the bear's hide, he found that only 2 bullets had struck the bear, and they were both .357 Magnum rounds. The first bullet had struck the bear in the thigh and lodged just above the leg joint. The second bullet struck the bear near the back of its ribs and traveled through one of the bear's lungs. It lodged just under the skin of the bear's chest. By mid-afternoon, the fishing party was now relieved and even giddy, knowing the bear would no longer threaten them. Brent had flown in again to deliver more supplies and was greeted with a full story detailing the bear's death. Following the exuberance, Brent relayed that on his way in he'd buzzed a giant brown bear about a mile away, headed in a straight line toward the fishing camp. Bob and Marietta opted to return with Brent, and on their way out, they buzzed the bear at only 1/2 mile from the fishing camp. After reviewing the accounts of this episode, I have a few questions for you. Was the bear behaving in a territorial or predatory manner toward the fishing campers? Why did the campers fire so many warning shots? Do you think Randy knew his rifle was inoperable? Would you ever put your fish within 10 yards of your tent? I sure wouldn't. I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.